by any means necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, John Blackmon, here with Jacquie Luqman. And as always, we are your guide for connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. And today we're having an edition of our weekly segment, the Redspin Report, where we discuss sports, politics, and struggle with Nate Wallace, co-host of the Redspin Sports podcast. Nate, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Sean and Jackie, good to be back, and Happy New Year.
Absolutely. Happy New Year to you too, Nate. And of course, Nate, usually every week we talk with you about the politics of sports. But I think we're going to do something a little different today because you happen to have been present here in Washington, D.C. during the fascist insurrection at the Capitol, where, a racist mob stirred up by President Donald Trump stormed the Capitol building. And we've been talking to different people all week who happened to be present. And I know that you were in the thick of it there and posted some footage about this to your Instagram. So really, I just want to start with what you were seeing out there during the storming of the Capitol and just basically what your impression was about, just all that insanity that was happening around you.
Yeah, there's so many. A lot of people overuse the phrase when they say, "Oh, it's so nuanced," and just kind of use that as a way to deflect having hard takes on things. But there really is some layers of nuance. These people leading this thing and the ringleaders of all that absolutely are fascists. They're white nationalists. They're white supremacists. The common thread you hear is, it's the whole "my country" thing, and in their mind, they don't even see the irony in what they're saying. I'll kind of skip to the end, but then work back. But I remember a lady at the end before they tear gassed. It was the biggest amount of tear gas I've seen at one time come out in a big way. But of course, that was after things had already gotten out of control, and they realized they had to kind of really get it. That they had to do something kind of dramatic at that point. But she said she's up there with a bullhorn saying, "Stop paying taxes. We got to stop paying these police, these cops. The government's a bunch of oppressors." And I just asked her straight up, well, you realize how are you going to go and go after all these BLM people and all these Antifa people? Don't you need your cops to go go after all those bad people, right? That are always causing all this trouble, And then she started saying, well, she couldn't really answer. Of course, she's just kind of bouncing around, going all over the place. But it's it just shows that these people, so many of them, for the first time in their lives, really got a taste of that kind of repression. Now, it wasn't at the beginning, because we keep hearing, obviously we know that the way, if it would have been a Black Lives Matter, protest, if it would have been organized by any kind of leftist radical group, they never even would have gotten to that point. But once it reached a critical mass and, it was they realized that, these protesters really had turned on the cops. I found it fascinating to hear the anti-police rhetoric coming from these people. But then, so Max Blumenthal and I went around, we just started kind of casually talking about, well, do you not see now why so many people of color talk about the way in which, the heavy-handedness of the law, talked about Deon Kay, Max was bringing up in Southeast D.C., who was running away from them with a handgun. And they're so big on gun rights. You would think naturally they'd stand in solidarity with, the fact this kid was, not posing a threat to them. And, granted in D.C., the gun laws are really strict. But while a few would start saying that, you didn't have someone else kind of butt in there that, it was an illegal firearm or criminal record, the usual things you hear going back to Trayvon Martin, that he was, looked menacing or something, or had, smoked weed at school or something like that. That was always the posthumous character assassination stuff. So that was really revealing. I also think there's an interesting dynamic that Max and I kind of talked about, and I think it was present, is that you have some young people there that really are just lost. And I'm not trying to just humanize people that are monsters. I'm not talking about the people that were storming in there doing the violence, but people that were echoing things such as, that this whole government has abandoned us. People from these small towns in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia and whatnot, places that have been economically abandoned by both of these parties. And while I'm not at all trying to make the case that these people can be, as a mass group, be organized with, I think it really speaks to the failure of the Democratic Party and the failure and what they've done for years in sucking up the energy of the left and making it impossible to reach these kind of people when it is early enough to the kinds that are kind of young, that are confused, that are impressionable, and they see the Democratic Party and the way that contempt they have for, middle America and whatnot. And even though they know the Republicans don't really represent them, they just are. A lot of those kids are confused. There is some of that. So there's so many layers to it. But I think ultimately it goes back to the failure of this establishment. And one thing that's just, and I'll kick it over to y'all, it's just that, the liberal response to this I find fascinating, because while it is horrifying and all this, I find people talking about the people's house and whatnot. And so I forget, this was built by like slave labor, enslaved African labor. This was a place where oligarchs go in there to do their business in the Senate to do the bidding of big lobbyists and for all sorts of interests, from to Israel to war lobby to keeping the private health insurance a thing in this country that cannot be questioned and off the agenda by both parties. And the idea that so many liberals just were like so offended about this, the sanctity of this house and what it all represents. I thought it's kind of like, I'm not saying I'm calling for like leftists to go storm in there. And I think now it would be almost impossible, but it is sad in light of the whole force the vote campaign, and the fact that we can't even get a floor vote out of, the Democratic Party on Medicare for all in a pandemic, much less a national health system, that these Tea Party types, that these 3%ers, that these militant militia types have basically been able to take out Eric Cantor, been able to take out Republican leadership. One guy straight up told me that, look, we will go home right now. Give us Mitch McConnell. Let us string him up, tie him up. We'll drag his behind down the Washington Mall behind the pickup truck, and we'll be out of here. And I was just like, oh, okay. So they weren't saying that about it's like, so there's something crazy there, but it's like you see the contempt even from these people. It's tough to know what they want. But what I noticed, and Max noticed as it went on, there were more and more people that they weren't talking as much about specifically the stop the steal. They just have this rage against the government. They're clearly racist. They don't see the irony in that they're mad at the government, but and that they don't see and they can't empathize and understand why Black people in this country feel the way they do, and that's clearly racism. But there's so many contradictions, and that's just kind of what I was trying to sort of underscore kind of by going over those sort of impressions I had and being out there.
Yeah, Nate, one of the things that struck me in the footage that you shared was the lack of a clear understanding of, I guess, for lack of a better way to explain it, how the government works, how the election process works, and what people expected to accomplish once they did whatever it was they were going to do at the Capitol building. So, I'm wondering what your sense was along those regards. Did people, from what you saw and heard, have a sense of what they believed they would stop by storming the Capitol and what the outcome of that would be? And if they even understood how the electoral process really works in this country?
Well, yeah, if you go back and you hear President Trump's speech earlier in the day, and all actually I was sitting with Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil last night and watching that and really breaking it down and just listening to all the different claims he's throwing out there about ballots. And you notice it's a common thread that it's always these, when they say big Democrat-run cities, that's really a code word for Black cities. The idea that there's inherently mischief going on and just cheating. It kind of goes back to that Acorn scandal in Chicago that they trumped up. The idea that, and while the Democrats are I don't have any faith that they want it cheat or whatever, just like Republicans, I don't have any faith. I know they would cheat too. It's about voter suppression. It's the idea about that, who's a real American, who's a citizen, who's not, and that this is their country. And I think that they thought that they could go in there somehow, and it's delusional, but put pressure on these more people, more of the Republicans on Pence, and that they were going to maybe, at the very least, maybe force a revote or something. And but a lot of it, I think that you have to look at too, is that a lot of the leadership of these people are, I think, people with PTSD, these Iraq, Afghanistan veterans. It struck me that there were clearly a lot of people out there that were former combat veterans. So let's look at the effects of these wars, these forever wars, thanks to the Bush administration and Cheney, who liberals seem gleeful about rehabilitating in this day and age of Trump. And they've created a generation of essentially zombies that are running out there who feel no purpose and no meaning in this world. And therefore, they're craving for these experiences where they can just kind of like rise up and be on a tactical mission and feel like they're part of something. And one of the common threads was that they really think that they were going to go in there, transform, like they put pressure on this thing, and they think that they're going to. This is an illegitimate government. They think they represent the real United States. That's how delusional a lot of the leadership is here. And they were out the tactical fatigues, but there were people that were leadership, the ringleaders, but then there were also just some pretty pathetic characters that you could tell are former vets that are mentally disturbed and are just dying to have an experience of being part of like some kind of tactical mission again. And I think that in their minds, and as delusional as it is, they don't really understand that. They believe this stuff about, just all this, stuff about, Dominion and the, and the steel and all that. And I think that they think that like this is their country and they're going to go in there. And some of these people are really ready to give their lives for, trying to. So it's a fascist like mentality. It's based on white supremacy and the idea that this country is theirs because their forefathers or whatever were the founders, whether that's even true or not. But they take on that, and that's something that's really disturbing. And I think a lot of the blame for that goes back to the Bush administration in creating, more and more people, and that are these people that are now back in this country who are just combat veterans who have PTSD, who combine that with getting mixed up in these kind of groups, and the ideology gets injected in there, and how incoherent it is. It's incoherent. It's a dangerous combination, and it shouldn't be taken lightly.
I agree that it shouldn't be taken lightly, Nate. And I agree. You definitely get the sense that there was this feeling of conquest amongst the folks who stormed the Capitol. I mean, you saw, images of people making it a point to go to that main seat in the chamber and kind of pose and raise their fists and take pictures and things like that. Of course, we saw some people's offices get broken into and people taking selfies of themselves in different people's chairs and things like this. Like, it was clear that there was a message that wanted to be sent that, like, okay, we've maybe even not the sense of taking over, but quote unquote, this notion of taking it back. You know what I mean? This notion of stopping the steal, which I think you're right. And that kind of ballooned into something else entirely. And the interesting thing about that is, although it's true that they were successful in sort of disrupting the functions of government in that moment, I mean, the government was still able to reconvene later on and go ahead and certify the vote. And what I think is clear when you say that it's not to be taken lightly, Nate, is that there has to be some kind of response from the truly progressive elements in the country. And I'm not talking about the Democratic Party, but I really mean sort of the masses of poor, working, and oppressed people who are the real targets, I think, of this group. I mean, that particular, insurrectionist act may have been aimed at the government in that moment. But like you say, I mean, we know that these elements promote every possible reactionary tendency. And so in reality, they want a country and a government that will repress Black people, people of color, and LGBTQ folks, and Muslims, and women, and all of the different marginalized groups. And so I just think it's important to sort of take note of that and to sort of be very sort of purposeful and intentional about taking stock about how the movement sort of moves forward from here, because it's sort of like you're getting it from both sides. There's sort of a fascist movements that now feels emboldened in the streets. We have an incoming administration that doesn't appear like it's going to do a whole lot for these very same groups. And so understanding about how this all sort of emerges from the same system and the same institution means that there's a difficult task ahead for the movement writ large. And of course, difficult doesn't mean impossible, but I do think this seems to be maybe something of a preview for what may be coming here in the near future.
No, there's no doubt about it. And the task does really fall to people, whether fair or not. I mean, it's never been about being fair. It's about being, look at the name of your show, about being necessary. And the reality is that the pernicious influence that the Democratic Party and these, like, the way they go into colleges and try to siphon off student activists and, with different, positions and NGOs and consultant jobs and whatnot. It's had a devastating effect on building a strong militant left that's, capable of, getting out and challenging those type of people and doing so in mass numbers. And it also making concrete demands, also showing that, this is not that the Democrats are, and making it clear that Democrats are not the left, and challenging that and taking that to them and continuing to make demands on power. I mean, I think I alluded to earlier, just the kind of crazy demands the Tea Party put on the Republican Party and that these groups have, but that despite as crazy as that is, they've been able to push through stuff. And, we're in this whole talk about the force the vote thing. I mean, it's a microcosm, I feel like, of the disdain the Democratic Party has for people that are fighting. And we should just get rid of all illusions that can be a vehicle, other than we need to make it where they know the price to pay for not pushing for Medicare for all, national health care system, ending the wars is bigger than the price they're worried about paying with their donors. And until that movement's able to build that level of power, it doesn't look pretty, but it also means there's a lot of possibilities. And I think this might be a moment where people realize that this is a new phase. And I hate that I'm actually quoting what a lot of those people were saying, which is a scary thought, because when the police attacked them, they had this moment of disillusion that, wow, this is like, the people, they're turning on us. We're supposed to be on the same team. And it was like, and you kept hearing this kind of new phase sort of talk. You saw the 3%ers out there. And so people need to realize what this is and what people are up against. And I think that's really critical. I mean, it's going to be the urgency of what the moment is right now and what we're up against in this administration coming in. It couldn't be more urgent, and it couldn't be more critical. And I don't think you can overstate that.
And, Nate, I'm glad you mentioned the word team, because it actually got me to thinking about one of the things that a lot of people said was key in turning the tide for the Democrats in Georgia. And that was Kelly Loeffler's WNBA basketball team coming out in support of Raphael Warnock over her. What do you see the role of sports figures being able to contribute to the kind of discourse that we need to have around this organizing effort in the future?
Oh, I see it being huge. And I think the WNBA has taken the lead, and I think actually set an example for many NBA players. I think it's encouraging. You see the NBA players have enormous amounts of solidarity for the WNBA players. But what the WNBA players of the Atlanta Dream did, not only in endorsing Raphael Warnock, pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist, and the historical significance of that is huge in Georgia. The history of Jim Crow and growing up in North Florida and being close to all that, it's absolutely significant. But there's been a lot of good comments. I mean, I would like to, with the NBA players, there's been a mixed bag a little bit, but I think that guys like Tyler Halliburton from the Sacramento Kings put it up by saying, condense the immense privilege on display, calling it as American as it gets. And Draymond Green felt the same way, saying this is what the country is, what it's always been, and what it probably will stay. And I hope that the one thing he's wrong about is the probably will stay, because I don't want to let us fall into this defeatism type stuff. But I think the possibilities are huge. And I think that this only is going to increase that and make people realize that, look, there is no option to be a Michael Jordan type anymore now if you care about this at all. Look for Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics to be a leader of that. David West, who's recently retired, to continue being a leader on these kind of fronts and hopefully leading and helping bring along the education of other athletes across. And like you look at the WNBA too, I mean, they're central to this. And what they did with Kelly Loeffler, I mean, is huge and hopefully inspires, continued further action, which I think it will.
Definitely. Well, we thank you so much, Nate, as always, for joining us today. We're going to leave it there and move to a break here on By Any Means Necessary. You're on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C., but we will be back. So please stay with us.
By any means necessary.